The first time Rachel quit, she was 17 years old, and her mother told her she would never be anything but a burden. The words had cut deep, not because they were cruel, but because for a brief, terrible moment, Rachel believed them. She had been born with a subtle inward rotation of her femurs, a condition that made her walk with a slight waddle and guaranteed that running was never going to be her strong suit. She was the girl picked last for dodgeball, the one who sat on the bench during track and field days, her knees wrapped in a thin cotton sleeve, watching the other kids fly. Growing up in a small, dusty town in West Texas, the only thing that made her feel alive was the cool water of the community pool. In the water, the laws of gravity that conspired against her on land were suspended. Her legs, awkward and ungainly on the pavement, became powerful propellers in the chlorinated blue. She wasn't just swimming, she was escaping. By the time she was a junior in high school, she held 3 state records in para-swimming events. The water was her sanctuary, her church, the only place where the world didn't see her as broken. But high school is a battlefield for anyone, and for Rachel, it was a daily gauntlet. The whispers were the worst. She'd hear them in the hallway, the sharp, sibilant sounds that coalesced into words meant to wound. Cripple. Gimpy. Why doesn't she just use a wheelchair if she walks like that? The boys on the football team, gods of the gridiron with their Letterman jackets and easy confidence, would mimic her gait as she passed, their laughter a thunderclap of cruelty that followed her into every class. She would sit in the back of the room, her face burning, pretending to be engrossed in a textbook while she willed herself to be invisible. Her mother, a woman worn thin by long shifts at a diner and the exhaustion of single parenthood, didn't understand. When Rachel came home crying, her mother would just sigh, a deep, weary sound from the pit of her stomach. Stop feeling sorry for yourself, Rachel. Life's not fair. You just have to deal with it. There was no comfort there, no shoulder to cry on. There was only the stark, unadorned reality of survival. Her mother wasn't being cruel, she was being honest. But to a teenage girl drowning in a sea of adolescent torment, it felt like the ultimate abandonment. The message was clear. You are on your own. That feeling of isolation hardened into something else during her senior year. A college scout from a Division III school with a decent para-swimming program came to watch her compete. She swam the race of her life, her arms slicing through the water with mechanical precision, her legs kicking in a perfect, powerful flutter. She touched the wall and looked up, gasping for air, a smile already forming. The scout was packing up his notebook. He gave her a short nod and left. She never heard from him again. Later, she found out through a coach that the scout had loved her times, but the school's insurance provider had balked. They considered her leg condition too high risk. She was an uninsurable liability. That was the moment the first part of her life ended. The rejection wasn't just about a swimming scholarship. It was a confirmation of her deepest fear. The world didn't just see her as different, it saw her as a problem to be avoided, a risk not worth taking. For the next 5 years, she did what her mother had always told her to do. She dealt with it. She got a job as a desk clerk at a local motel, checking in truckers and tired families. She sat in a chair for 8 hours a day, her legs aching from the stillness. She became exactly what everyone had always expected her to become: quiet, invisible, and burdened. The fire that had burned in the pool was reduced to cold embers, buried under the ash of low expectations. She had quit, not with a bang, but with a long, slow, defeated sigh. The change began, as it often does, with a random encounter. It was a slow Tuesday night at the motel. A man in his late 40s with close-cropped hair and a rigid posture that seemed to defy the sagging lobby furniture checked in. He was wearing a plain t-shirt, but it did little to hide the physique of someone who spent a lot of time carrying heavy things. He was a retired Navy SEAL, passing through town on his way to see family. He was polite, quiet, and didn't ask for extra towels. The next morning, Rachel saw him sitting in the small breakfast nook, staring out the window at the scrubland. He looked as lost as she felt. On a whim, she poured herself a cup of the terrible coffee and sat down across from him. Not much of a view, she said. He turned and gave her a small, sad smile. It's a view, he said. That's more than some guys get. They talked for an hour. She didn't know why she told him her story, the swimming, the bullies, the insurance rejection, the slow death of her ambition. Maybe it was because he was a stranger, a ghost passing through. He listened without interrupting, his eyes, the color of a winter sky, never leaving her face. When she finished, there was a long silence. She expected pity or a platitude. Instead, he leaned forward. You know what the difference is between a SEAL and a regular person? He asked. She shook her head. A regular person sees a wall and looks for a door. A SEAL sees a wall and looks for something to climb with. He tapped the table where her hands were clasped. You've been looking for a door for 5 years. Maybe it's time to start climbing. He left that afternoon, but he left something behind. He'd scribbled a name and an address on a napkin. It was for a gym, but not just any gym. It was a gym owned by a former Marine, a place that specialized in training people for military and law enforcement fitness tests. The napkin sat on her dresser for 2 weeks. She'd pick it up every night, look at it, and put it back down. You can't even run, the voice in her head, the one that sounded like the football players and the insurance adjuster, would whisper. What are you going to do, swim the obstacle course? But the SEAL's words echoed louder. Look for something to climb with. One Saturday morning, before she could talk herself out of it, she got in her car and drove to the address. The gym was a concrete box in an industrial park. It smelled of sweat, iron, and rubber. Men and women were throwing tractor tires, climbing ropes, and flipping massive sleds. Rachel stood in the doorway, frozen. This was not her world. This was a world of the powerful, the strong, the whole. She was just a desk clerk with bad legs, a mountain of a man with a shaved head and a graying beard. The owner, Mike, walked over. He looked her up and down, his gaze clinical, not unkind. Help you? She held up the napkin, her hand trembling slightly. A guest at the motel. He told me to come here. Mike took the napkin, glanced at it, and nodded. He looked back at her. What's your goal? The question hung in the air. What was her goal? To not be a burden? To feel something other than numb? To prove the scout wrong, even if it was 5 years too late? I don't want to quit anymore, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Mike stared at her for a long moment. Then he pointed to a pull-up bar. Show me what you've got. Her first workout was a disaster. She couldn't do a single pull-up. She couldn't run a quarter of the track without her legs screaming in protest. She couldn't lift the empty barbell. People stared. She saw the looks, the same confused, pitying glances from her high school hallways. She wanted to flee, to retreat back to her chair at the motel, where the only thing that hurt was her pride. But Mike was relentless. He saw something in her that no one else had seen in years, potential. He didn't care about her legs, he cared about her will. He put her on a program that worked around her limitations. Instead of running, she did endless reps on the assault bike. Instead of squats, she did modified leg presses and focused on building the immense strength in her upper body. For the first time in her adult life, she was working. She was sweating. She was hurting. But it was a good hurt. It was the hurt of building something, not the dull ache of letting yourself fall apart. She started following the training regimens of special operations candidates online. She read about the Navy SEALs, the Army Green Berets, the Marine Raiders. She learned about the crucible of basic underwater demolition/SEAL, BUD/S training, a 6-month course designed to break the strongest men in the world. It was legendary for its brutality, the constant cold, the sleep deprivation, the relentless physical punishment, the infamous Hell Week, where candidates are allowed only 4 hours of sleep over 5.5 days while undergoing continuous physical evolutions. It was insane. It was impossible. For a woman with her physical challenges, it was laughable. She kept it a secret, a fantasy she would indulge late at night after her workouts. She'd watch videos of students shivering on the beach in Coronado, their faces masks of pure agony, their bodies shaking uncontrollably from the cold. And a strange feeling would bloom in her chest. It wasn't pity, it was envy. They were being tested to their absolute limit. They were being asked, "How bad do you want it?" And the ones who survived answered with their entire being. She had never been asked that question. The world had only ever asked her, "How little can you do?" One night, after a particularly brutal session where Mike had pushed her until she vomited, she looked at herself in the gym's mirror. She was leaner, stronger. The softness of the desk clerk was gone, replaced by a wiry, coiled strength. And in that moment, the fantasy became an intention. She wasn't just going to get fit. She was going to see if she could answer that question. She was going to find out once and for all if the girl who was picked last had what it took to stand among the men who were picked first. The journey to a BUD/S tryout is a monumental task for any able-bodied person. For Rachel, it was a gauntlet of paperwork and physicals that seemed designed specifically to exclude her. She had to get waivers for her pre-existing condition. She had to undergo countless evaluations by Navy doctors who looked at her x-rays and her gait and told her, in the most professional terms possible, that she was wasting their time. One doctor, a commander, was blunt. "Miss, this is not a rehabilitation program. This is a combat training course. Your femurs will not hold up. You are a liability to yourself and to a future team." She heard the word again. Liability. Just like the insurance adjuster all those years ago. She stood up from his desk, her legs aching from the simple act of sitting. "With respect, sir," she said, her voice steady, "I've been a liability my whole life. I'm here to change that." The paperwork was submitted. The waivers were miraculously approved. It was as if the universe itself had paused, waiting to see what she would do. She packed a single bag and flew to San Diego. She arrived at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado on a gray, overcast morning. The wind off the Pacific was cold and carried the smell of salt and diesel. The infamous grinder, a vast expanse of concrete where candidates would spend countless hours doing calisthenics, stretched out before her. It looked like a prison yard. She was the only woman in her class of 220 hopefuls. She was also the oldest, and by far the smallest. The other candidates, all young men at the peak of their physical prowess, looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and barely concealed skepticism. They didn't say anything, but they didn't have to. Their stares were a language she had learned to read fluently in high school. What is she doing here? She's going to quit. She's going to get someone hurt. Her first evolution on the grinder was a disaster. During a simple run, her gait, which she could manage on flat ground, was exacerbated by the fatigue and the sand. She stumbled, drawing a sharp rebuke from the instructor. "What's wrong with your legs, sweetheart? You run like you're crabbing sideways." The other candidate snickered. She felt the familiar burn of shame, the old urge to shrink away. But she didn't. She got up, corrected her form as best she could, and kept running. The days blurred into a continuous cycle of pain, the surf torture, where they had to sit in the freezing Pacific surf and roll in the sand until they were covered in a gritty, chafing paste. The endless logs, heavy and awkward, that they had to carry as a boat crew. If one person stumbled, the whole team suffered. Rachel, with her unstable gait, stumbled often. Her boat crew, a group of 7 men, grew to resent her. They didn't see her as a teammate, they saw her as a handicap. The looks of skepticism turned to looks of cold resentment. They stopped talking to her. One night, after a particularly long day, they were ordered to do boat push-ups with their IBS, inflatable boat, small, on the grinder. The entire class was exhausted. Rachel's legs were screaming. As they lowered the heavy rubber boat, her left leg buckled. The boat tilted, slamming into the candidate next to her. The instructor was on them in an instant, screaming in her face, his voice a hurricane of fury. "You just got your boatmate hurt! You are a danger to this team! Do you understand that? A danger!" That night, alone in her bunk, she broke down. The tears she had held back for weeks finally came. The seal's words from years ago echoed in her mind, but now they sounded like